Good morning, High Rock. I'm John, one of the pastors, and I'm honored to be able to make a contribution to today's service and this series. Throughout this series of Lent, we've been looking at this passage in John 4, the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman at the well. We've been drawing a lot from this well, and maybe you're wondering if it's finally run dry. Frankly, I had the same concern in the back of my mind when we launched this series, but I've been pleasantly surprised to enjoy such a rich diversity of insights, encouragement, and challenges. And now we return to the well one last time before Easter. Once again, we see Jesus, who had to go through Samaria, which is strange. No first century Jew had to go through Samaria. In fact, they would go many miles out of their way to avoid going through Samaria. And once again, we see the Samaritan woman. I'm just going to call her Sam for short. Sam would rather draw water from Jacob's well under the searing noontime desert sun than face the searing stares of shame from the other villagers. Why did Jesus have to go through Samaria? I believe it's because he had a date to keep with Sam. He had something he wanted to give to her, but he wanted to ask her to give him something first. Will you give me a drink? Will you give me a drink? Such a simple request. Sam didn't think it was simple. She was shocked and a little suspicious. Jesus was crossing a racial and ethnic divide, not to mention a gender taboo. But honestly, it shocked Sam that anyone would ask her for something. She was an outcast. Even her own people wanted nothing to do with her. No one thought she had anything to give. No one except Jesus. Have you ever felt like you had nothing worthwhile to contribute, nothing to give? Have you ever felt that others saw you as a burden? That others wished you would just be quiet or go away? According to the late Mother Teresa, the greatest modern disease is not tuberculosis or leprosy, it's being unwanted. It's feeling that you have nothing to give. My wife's family is great, but I remember several occasions when we were dating when we'd all be together and Amy and her siblings would be bantering back and forth. I wanted to join in, but they were making references and inside jokes that I just didn't get. I felt like I didn't have anything I could contribute. I didn't know their stories. I didn't speak the lingo. And not having anything to contribute meant that I felt like I didn't belong. Again, my wife's family is great, but I imagine that you can recall being in similar situations. Being in a position to give, to contribute, it's just essential to feel like you belong, that you're wanted. Maybe you felt like that when moving to a new town or a new school or a new job, or when your significant other brings you to an office party, or any place you feel like you don't quite fit in. Maybe you felt that way walking into church. You don't speak the language. You don't know what the expectations are. You're not sure what you're supposed to do or even if you're allowed to be there. If that's you, welcome. And I applaud your courage for taking that step, even if it's just to join us online. Being new is hard. Knowing that you have something to contribute gives us a sense of value and security and belonging. But no one wanted anything to do with Sam. And when no one wants anything you have to give, it's a lot easier to give things you shouldn't give, just so you can have some connection, any connection. And when that happens, it's easy to get used, like the text implies had happened to Sam. I want to give us all a few moments to consider the ways in which we might feel like Sam. What are some of the ways that you have felt unwanted or unwelcome, or that you simply didn't belong because you didn't have anything that others wanted? Take a few moments to prayerfully consider these questions with God, or turn to the others who might be around you to discuss them together. Welcome back. I hope you had a good opportunity for contemplation and discussion. In fact, I encourage you to consider following up over lunch or coffee to hear the longer version of one another's stories. I think that Mother Teresa was right that one of society's greatest diseases is the curse of feeling unwanted. So it's telling that Jesus starts by giving Sam an opportunity to be a giver. No one wanted Sam. No one wanted what she had to contribute, but Jesus dignifies her by making a genuine request. He is thirsty, after all. It's noontime in the desert sun, and he has nothing to draw water from the well. I moved a lot when I was 5, so I attended 3 different kindergartens. As the only non-white child in any of those classes, the transition was even harder. It's amazing the kind of casual racism that kids can pick up by the age 5. And I'll be honest, that's a wound that has never fully healed. But God uses it to give me a heart for other people who feel like outsiders, and also a deep appreciation for people who take notice. One of my kindergarten teachers must have noticed that I was struggling to fit in. Back then, we had these giant chalkboards in the front of the classroom, and those chalkboard erasers would quickly accumulate dust and had to be taken outside to clean. My teacher would often give me that task, probably so I could feel more included. She gave me the opportunity to make a contribution and know that I was wanted. She was building a well, not a wall, and I still remember it now, 50 years later. People like her have helped me to want to give back in the same way. Similarly, Jesus starts his interaction with Sam by giving her the opportunity to do something she was almost never allowed to do, to be a giver. He wasn't using her like other men had apparently done. Instead, he was dignifying her humanity. I remember working with an inner city shelter, and the director there said to us that you never want to help people in a way that robs them of their dignity. Everyone has something to give, even if it's just helping to clean tables or serve food. Their philosophy was to always honor people's dignity while helping them. When Jesus asks Sam for a drink of water, it seems like a small thing. But that means a lot when you consider how thirsty she is for anyone to offer her an ounce of dignity. Like that kindergarten teacher who asked me to clean chalkboard erasers. But Jesus isn't just interested in Sam becoming a giver of small drinks. He has a vision for her to become a river of living water. Whoever drinks of the water of Jacob's well will just get thirsty again, but whoever drinks of the spiritual water Jesus is offering, that person will become a stream of living water. You become the well. Be the well. But what exactly is living water? It wasn't just some super spiritual metaphor. Living water is simply water that looks like it's alive. It's moving and active like a mountain stream. That's living water. In contrast, dead water is water that isn't moving, like your backyard pond. When my kids would go hiking with me, I couldn't wait to point out the difference. I would ask them, would you rather take a drink from that stream or from that pond? Living water will give you life. Dead water will kill you or make you wish you were dead. Jesus promises us living water, life-giving water. Sam, the very person from whom no one wanted anything, could become a fountain of God's grace. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. By the end of this encounter with Jesus, we read that Sam was the one to give everyone else the invitation to come see Jesus. The woman who snuck out to the well at noontime just so she could avoid everyone became the one who stood up in the middle of town to invite everyone to join her. Sam, who started out with no connection to the others in her village, became the one who connected everyone to faith in Jesus. Sam's story is important because Jesus extends the very same invitation to us. Throughout this series, we've been talking about identifying wells or creating wells or going to the well. Today, we're talking about the invitation to be the well, to be the fountain through which God's grace flows to others. Now, you might think that you have little or nothing to give, but that's what Sam thought too. You might be in a place in life where you've recognized that you might need to receive more than you give. And we all have seasons like that. But even in the driest seasons, we still need some water flowing through us. I want to talk a little bit about some of the challenges and misunderstandings that block or slow the living water that Jesus wants to flow through us. First, if you feel that you have little or nothing to give, remember Sam's story. She thought she had nothing to give, but Jesus started with what was in her hand, a drink of water. It's the same way that God started with Moses, simply asking him what was in his hand. Whatever is already in your hands, God can use it, just like Jesus used a little boy with some loaves and fish to feed 5,000. Perhaps it's time to consider that maybe, like Sam, Jesus is asking you for a drink. And as Jesus said elsewhere, not even the smallest gift escapes God's notice. A kindergarten teacher who asked me to clean erasers made a lasting impact on me. Imagine what your gift could do. Like the loaves and fish that Jesus used to feed the crowds, Jesus can magnify what you have to give. In fact, with some of the most important things in life, the more you give away, the more you have yourself. Now, yes, it's true that if you give away money, you have less money. It's math. And if you give away time, now you have less time. True. But what if you give away wisdom or relational connections or faith? Teachers who spend their whole lives giving away knowledge and wisdom just seem to grow more knowledgeable and wise. It seems that the more you give, the more you'll have to share, especially because you pay closer attention to the lessons you learn and you keep learning from others along the way. Are there people in your life who could benefit from your wisdom? In the young adults ministry in Arlington, Pastor Justin often asks some of the not-so-young adults to stay on as team leaders or small group leaders. They often feel like they have nothing to give, but that little bit of extra experience navigating the challenges of adulting can be so helpful to others. In middle school ministry, it's great to have high schoolers, and in high school ministry, it's wonderful to have college students and young adults. You might think that you have nothing to give, but God might be asking for what's already in your hands. 2 weeks ago, I listened to a high rocker who's a physician and a cancer researcher share about how his most important job is to care for those who work in his lab. Rather than extracting value from them, he is looking to be of value to them. That's the vision. Another way you can give and actually receive more in the end is by actively sharing your relational connections. I love watching Azer, one of our counselors, or Pastor Kim, as they eagerly seek to connect new people to others. The more they give away their connections, the more extensive their connections become. You don't have to be everyone's friend, but if you can help others find friends, you'll have more friends than you can know what to do with. I think it's one of the reasons why Pastor Kim often asks new people to join the welcoming team. By helping others to make connections, they become so richly connected themselves. I remember listening to Tim Sanders, the former chief solutions officer for Yahoo and a best-selling author. He was talking about one of the 3 key people who were part of building up the State Farm Insurance Company back when it was founded in the 1920s. The person he was highlighting wasn't the best at sales or the best at finding new clients, but he had a practice that served him very well. Every Friday, he would schedule a lunch with 3 people who really should get to know one another. Maybe it would be one person with a business plan but no capital, and maybe another person who was a builder, and the other a finance person who could help make these plans into a reality. Kind of like Shark Tank, but a lot less pressure. And he would set up these lunches, introduce everyone, and pay for lunch, and then leave. He didn't try to sell them anything or personally benefit in any way. This practice caused his relational network to multiply exponentially, and it affected his bottom line as well. In the mid-1930s, he was taking home over $1 million a year, and those were some pretty lean years. If you share your relational wealth, it will only grow. In addition to your wisdom and your relational network, like Sam, you can give away your faith. You can pray for people or pray with people. You can comfort people and encourage and walk with people through hard times. You can introduce people to Jesus and lovingly share all that he has done in your life. The people who learn to give away their faith are inevitably people who end up with more faith to give. Unlike money or time, there really are some gifts that actually grow the more you give them away. So that's the first point. You might feel like you have nothing to give, but you do. Just like Sam, maybe it's what you have in your hand already, or maybe it's another gift that only grows the more you give it away. If Jesus were to ask you for a drink, what would that be? What's in your hand? You might feel like you have little wisdom or few relationships to use to bless others, and maybe even little faith to share. But Sam was in the same boat. Yet God used her testimony and even her strained relational connections to create a flow of living water. A second point for us to consider is our fear of giving away what we have. Now, unlike wisdom and relational connections and faith, sometimes we sense that God wants us to give away something that doesn't multiply when we give it away, like money or time. And if we give it away, we fear we won't have enough. This is where the image of living water versus dead water can be very helpful. Think about a stream. They say you never step into the same river twice. There's always water freely flowing in and water freely flowing out. That's what the word stream means. That movement, that flow, that's what makes it living water. When water flows in freely, but only trickles out, that's dead water, like a backyard pond, or in Jesus' context, the Dead Sea. It looks pretty, but if you have even the slightest nick or cut anywhere, it burns. And more importantly, it can't support life. John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, famously preached that there were 3 keys to a healthy relationship with money. Gain all you can, save all you can, give all you can. That's how money is meant to stream into and out of our lives. Sadly, most people are content to say, 2 out of 3 ain't bad. And that's why we're told to pray to God to give us our daily bread. Why not pray for enough for tomorrow as well, and the next day and the next? Because then we wouldn't constantly return to God to be filled. We'd be tempted to trust in our money and forget God. But sometimes we don't want to trust God. So we accumulate far more than we need, and we're far less generous than God asks. Water flows in, but it only trickles out, like a pond, like the Dead Sea. Before the time of Jesus, the prophet Jeremiah was speaking to people who didn't want to trust God. They wanted gods they could control rather than a God they would have to trust. And so this is what God said to them through Jeremiah. My people have committed 2 sins. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water, and have dug their own cisterns, broken cisterns that cannot hold water. Cisterns were these underground holding tanks. King Herod's fortress at Masada has a massive cistern that could hold over 1 million gallons of water. But as a spiritual metaphor, Jeremiah is referring to our desire to accumulate good things and hold on to them so we don't have to trust God. We don't believe that God will be a giver even though that's God's central identity. God doesn't want us to be backyard ponds or a Dead Sea or a broken cistern. Instead, Jesus invites us to be streams of living water. Jesus later repeated this same invitation to a huge crowd at the temple in Jerusalem. In the final days of a great religious feast, Jesus loudly declared to the crowd, "Whoever believes in me, as Scripture has said, rivers of living water will flow from within them." Consider Jesus' invitation. First, as a stream, you have to be fed into by a source of water. And Jesus is clear here, just as he was with Sam. Jesus is the source. If we believe, if we trust, if we ask, he will pour out his Spirit into us. Are you having trouble accepting God's invitation to be a giver? Perhaps it's because you haven't first received. If you feel you don't have something to give, maybe it's time to receive from God so you do have something to offer. People often make a big deal about the spiritual gifts that are mentioned in the New Testament, but the most important thing about them is the promise that God gives everyone a gift, a spiritual capacity to bless others, so that we can all become givers. God pours the Spirit into us so we can pour that blessing into others. Maybe you can invite God into your life more, or perhaps for the first time. If you've never done that or have questions about what that even means, I encourage you to talk to one of the pastors or a trusted Christian friend. I'd love to be a part of that conversation as well. When I first became a believer, I didn't know what living water was or why we pray for daily bread. What I knew was that God had blessed me and wanted me to bless others. More than that, I could see how my joy was magnified when I could share it with others. So during my sophomore year at Carnegie Mellon, I volunteered to be a freshman camp counselor. I don't know if they still do this, but back then, they invited the first years to come out for a few days early before the other students arrived. And we'd spend the first 3 days at a camp, doing some fun things and helping these new students to make a couple of friends before even setting foot on campus. I had become a believer in my first year at college, but in my second year, I volunteered to be a camp counselor for the incoming class. And after it was all over, I got a call that the Dean of Student Affairs wanted to see me. And I thought, uh-oh, this can't be good. What did I do? I sheepishly made my way over to the administrative building, which was this big, imposing structure that looked so out of place with its dark glass and steel. And I made my way up inside to the dean's office, and as I waited for him to see me, I kept racking my brain, like, what did I do? Why am I here? What kind of trouble am I in? Finally, the dean invited me in, and I waited for him to drop the hammer, but he said, "Hey, I was visiting camp and I kept noticing how you were helping the students who are having difficulty making connections. That's what this whole program is for, and I want to thank you for what you did for those students." What? I walked out of that building on cloud 9, mostly because I wasn't in trouble. But later I had the chance to reflect on how God was changing my life. Even now, I'm seeing a connection to the way even that kindergarten teacher reached out to an outsider like me, and how that was one of the many little gifts that have made me want to do the same for others. As we've considered in this series, we can go to the well, we can make wells, but let's not miss the fact that God invites us to be the well. We can be a conduit for that living water that comes from God. That's the invitation that Jesus gave to Sam. It's the invitation that Jesus gave to me. And it's the invitation that Jesus extends to you. Jesus invites you to give what you have rather than worry about what you don't have. It started with Sam giving Jesus a drink of water, but God multiplied that to her being able to give away her faith and her experience and her connection to Jesus. Now, Jesus also invites you to receive, to be constantly, daily connected, to seek God for your daily bread and direction. And if I can suggest a daily prayer, maybe pray this each morning. Lord, help me to see how you want to bless others through me today. It's a conscious dependence on the Holy Spirit to guide us and to use us. And finally, a word for those of us who don't like to receive. Sometimes we don't like to be a burden. Sometimes we don't want to feel helpless or that we owe someone. But sometimes one of the greatest gifts we have to give is to allow someone else to give to us. Remember that this whole encounter between Jesus and Sam started with Jesus inviting Sam to give him something that he truly needed, even if it was just a drink of water. Sometimes one of the greatest gifts is to grant someone else the dignity to be a giver. And as we receive, Jesus invites us to remember that God gives to us so that we too can become givers. The life of God is one of flowing generosity, and as children created in the image of God, we are invited to find the same fullness of life in the same way.